our studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Kevin Spacey is one of our most distinguished actors. He appears not only in film, popular films like Superman Returns, but also on stage in plays like The Iceman Cometh. He is now the artistic director of the Old Vic Theater. He went to the 92nd Street Y to talk with me about his roles and his career. Here is that conversation. So there is, as you know, a lot of buzz about Superman Returns. You play Lex Luthor. Tell me why this seems to be getting, and sequels don't always get this kind, and even Superman sequels don't always get this kind of attention. What is it about this film?
Well, it's probably that it's been so long. It's been 18 years since the last Superman film. It's been in development at Warner Brothers for a very long time with a number of different directors, so there was all these maybes that the film was going to happen. And finally, when Bryan Singer, the very fine director of a picture I made 10 years ago, The Usual Suspects, who went on to direct...
Let me interrupt you. For some reason, that film, I mean, I was sitting with some people not long ago, young people, and they said one of their favorite films to get on DVD is Usual Suspects. What is it?
It's a film that I think generally, when people saw it for the first time, it screwed them up so much that they just keep watching it again and again, hoping that they'll trick it.
Right.
I also think that it was an exceedingly complex film and directed with such authority by, at that time, Bryan was 10 years younger than he is now, which means that if he looks 12 now, he looked 8 then. I just think it's one of those movies that was so well crafted, so brilliantly written, so well cast, that it's managed to have a life well beyond its release, and we're all grateful for that.
So he went from Usual Suspects.
Well, he did all the, he did the first 2 X-Men movies.
Yeah.
And I think when Bryan called me and said that he wanted me to consider playing Lex Luthor, it was such an easy answer to have the opportunity to work with him again. And I'm happy to report that he is the same director now that he was 10 years ago. He has obviously a few more toys up his sleeve and a lot bigger budget than we had on Usual Suspects. But he is still driven and interested in and focused on character and on relationships. And so despite the fact that this was a big summer tentpole movie, lots of money, I never felt dwarfed by the size of it, because Bryan's focus has always been about character. And so we had just as intimate an experience making this movie as we did on Suspects.
When you do a part like this, based on what you just said, do you think much about it? Or are you at a stage in your career today where you have done it all, you've learned as much as you have, that if you've got a good script, it's home free?
If you've got a good script, you're halfway there. Because to me, it's always been about the writing, it's always been about the storyline, it's always been about, is there an arc of a character here, no matter what genre you're in. And if you have a director who has a vision and can describe that vision to you and can have a language with you in which you're able to make active the ideas in the script and in a director's vision, then that's what I trust. I've always come from the point of view that I'm less a creative person. I don't mean that to denigrate the creative process, but I'm an interpreter. I interpret someone else's ideas. And if I can get into that head and I can understand what the effect that director wants to have on an audience in each of those scenes and how that character is going to hopefully be carved out in the editing process, which is where a performance is really made, is in editing. And there are times when I've seen movies I've done where I've thought, well, I know we shot a better movie than they cut. But with Bryan, I just trusted him completely.
What did you find out when you began to direct?
I found out what is so valuable for a director and an editor is actors that give a variety of choices in a particular scene. I'll give you an example. If you and I were doing a scene here today, and in a way, we are.
This is a performance?
And we had a camera there and a camera here and a camera there and a camera. And you shoot it all over the room. What you want to try to do in each of those takes, you know, you maybe say you get 6 takes from that camera, and 6 takes from this camera, and 6 takes from that camera. You want to try to give the director a series of choices where you might play a scene particularly angry, or you might find a lighter touch for a line, or you might come at something in a different way, so that when he gets into editing, or she gets into editing, they can decide, you know, the way he said that line is just too rough, it's too hard, it makes him unattractive at this moment. Did he do it softer? And then they can go in the editing and they can find that take where you did it softer. The director and the editor are the ones that are crafting the performance in terms of how it's modulated. And when you direct, it is so fantastic to have actors who will give you choices. Now, there's a good side to that and there's a downside to that. The good side is, if you have a wonderful director and a terrific editor, they're going to take out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff. And they're going to craft it in the right way. If you have a lousy director and a terrible editor, they're going to put all the bad stuff in.
Now, wait a minute. Why is that? I mean, nobody wants to intentionally make a bad movie.
That is true, except in the producers, perhaps.
Yes, that's true. And look,
I don't mean the movie, I mean the producers in the play.
Yeah.
I would say this, that it depends on your sensibility. If you are a terribly sentimental director, you will choose all the weepy, most sentimental takes, and they may not provide the audience an opportunity to fulfill that emotion because you're giving it to them all. And when an audience is given everything, and they're not given the opportunity to come halfway to a performance, then I think an audience turns off because they're being spoon-fed what they're supposed to actually be feeling on their own. So sometimes in films that I've done and other films that I see, you just see a series of choices where it's obviously a very sentimental point of view.
Let's talk about one of your best roles, American Beauty. How much did Mendes shape that character?
Hugely.
And how so?
Sam began to shape it for me very early on in the process and before we ever even got into rehearsal, and we were fortunate in that experience to have about 2.5 weeks with the entire company of actors rehearsing every single scene.
And was that unusual?
Film. It is unusual. Most times on movies you show up on a film set at 6 in the morning and you meet the woman who's playing your wife. Hi. And we'll be in bed all day. Nice to see. With Sam, he started talking to me about the essential characteristics of Lester Burnham. And he used a template that for me was brilliant because it was not only a performance I admired enormously from an actor that I adored and was a huge influence on me and ultimately I had opportunities to work with and who became a great mentor of mine. And that was Jack Lemmon's performance in The Apartment. And we watched it because Jack had this innate and extraordinary ability to locate for all of us the Jack Lemmon in us. And we identified with so many of the characters he played.
Well,
because
what's the Jack Lemmon in us?
It's that part of a performance where you see a character and you say, I know that feeling, you know, I understand that, I have felt that, oh God, I know what that feels like. And with Lemmon, whether he was playing a tough character, an alcoholic character, a schmooze, a loser, a pain in the ass, we identified with him. He had something about him that we understood, and that was the quality that Sam and I wanted so much for Lester Burnham to have, for audiences both old and young, to be able to identify with this man going through this life change and this crisis.
And how did he shape it as the film and the directing was
Sam
underway?
Sam is one of those directors who not only knows exactly what to say to you as an actor, but he knows the exact moment to choose to say it. And I'll give you an example of this. There are times when you're doing a play and you might finally, after 5 or 6 weeks of rehearsal, get into the process of now in previews. So you're now performing the play in front of an audience. And that's really where you start to learn about the growth of the play and how it all connects and what an audience tells you. And sometimes you're not ready for a note. You're not ready to understand or grapple with, or you haven't lived with it long enough and allowed it to percolate for a note to make sense to you. So sometimes if a director gives you a note too early in rehearsal, you have no idea how to digest it because you don't know enough about the character. Sam is one of those directors who he could, on any given day while we were shooting, just come up to me on take 4 of a scene we'd been doing and whisper something in my ear that would make me think of something. Or Sam does things that some directors do quite brilliantly, which is he tells a story. He'll tell a story about a time that he was somewhere with someone and did something, and it's only after the story's over and he walks away and now he's rolling the camera that you realize, oh, he told me that story for a reason. Now I'm thinking something, and then you're going, and that idea feeds through you and comes
Now, do you
through the
remember
scene.
one of those stories?
No, I can't, Charlie, I'm sorry.
So what's different between film and theater? I mean, we're sitting here in a proscenium, and there's an audience of 1,000 people. How is it different for you on stage versus on film?
Well, I think the biggest difference is the actual day-to-day experience. Making movies is, it's very cushy. They treat you very well. They pay you very well. There's lots of people who are doing things for you, and you're escorted here and escorted there, and you show up on a set and you shoot a scene, and you might spend 12 hours on a scene, on a day, on a Wednesday.
One scene.
One scene. And you may have not shot the scenes that happened before that scene. You may have not met the people who are going to play those roles before you shoot that scene in which you're supposed to have been affected by those events that you have yet to shoot. So what it means is that in every film experience, unless you have a Sam Mendes or a Bryan Singer, you are working with a director and you're working with scriptwriters and you're working with other actors and you're guessing a lot. Every day is a guessing game. Did I play this scene right? Did I give it the right qualities? What will I know next week about this character that I wish I would have known today when we're putting it in this can and it's going away and I will never have another chance to play this scene ever again?
Even today, as good as you are, the roles you've played, the accolades that have come your way, are you still looking for approval? Are you still asking the director, did I get it? Am I there?
Yeah.
Or was I okay?
I mean,
is that the nature of an actor?
I do believe it's the nature of the arts. You do get to a place, I hope, where you stop looking outside of yourself for answers to questions that you can only answer. But what is always true is that I walk into every situation that I face as an actor, as a director, knowing that I have something to gain and that I have something to learn, and that person, that director who I'm putting my trust in, becomes my teacher, because I'm a perpetual student. I don't want to ever stop being a student. And that's the person that you are going through an experience with. I recently did Richard II in London with Trevor Nunn as the director. It was one of the most remarkable experiences that I've had. I've been so fortunate in the theater jobs that I've had to work with remarkable directors who guide you through the whole experience, who carve it, who challenge you, who force you to go places that your own instinct says may be wrong. But that's the important thing, is to always question your own instinct, not ever rely on it, and look to others who have a bigger vision, a broader vision of the whole piece. And the other big difference for me is, aside from the fact that film is a director's medium and theater is an actor's medium, where you get a chance to actually play the whole character's experience from A to Z in 2 hours or 3 hours, or in the case of Iceman, 4 hours.
Yeah, but here's what's interesting to me. You can, in a play, create the arc of a character. How do you do that in a movie when you're shooting it out of sequence?
That's where you start to rely on your theater experience, because it is in the theater that you come to appreciate story arc and character arc, because you experience it night to night, and you get a chance night to night to come back and try it again, attack it from another way. It's like, the best analogy that I've ever come up with is like anybody who plays sports or plays chess. Every time you play, it's a new game.
Right.
Every time. The rules are the same, but the game is new. You're working on a different
And so
part of
that's
the
the
game.
way it is on stage.
Every single night, it is alive, and you feel like you're walking on a tightrope, and you could fall off at any moment. And when you do fall off, and sometimes you do, sometimes words don't come out the way you hoped, and it's particularly embarrassing when you're doing Shakespeare. Because, we just did Richard II in Germany. We took it there for a week of performances. First time we've taken a play outside the Old Vic. And I screwed up a line. I mean, I don't know what came out of my mouth, but it wasn't iambic pentameter, and it certainly wasn't Shakespeare. And I think I may have actually ended up mumbling something. And I felt so sorry for the translators, the German translators who were typing. So there is no going back. There is no second take. There is a spirit to it. And I have to also say I love the ritual of it. I love the ritual of coming every day and working with a group of people who become your family. Every day, every night, you're all dedicated to telling this story to a new group of people.
And for you, it's fresh every time?
Yeah.
Because you don't know how that night's going to be. You don't know how you feel. You don't know how they're going to be. Some X factor is always at work, as it is in a baseball game.
Yes, exactly. And you try as best you can to whatever circumstance you find yourself in, whatever mood you're in, you try to allow that to exist. You don't try to hide it. There are nights when I was a very angry king. Yeah. There were other nights when I was less angry.
And does that depend on, as they sometimes wonder about Supreme Court justices, what your breakfast was like, or how well you got along with your
Yeah, it absolutely. And the truth is, that's all fine, because
that makes it different every night.
It makes it different every night. Keeps it alive.
Is there any experience you wish you had had that you don't have that have served you as an actor?
Well, certainly working with certain people who passed along a long time ago. I grew up dreaming of working with Spencer Tracy or Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart.
Why them?
Because they were the best. They were the best because they all came out of the theater.
But they also seem, at first glance, to be people whose genius was the naturalness of what they did.
Yeah.
You didn't think you saw acting with them.
Well, that is the trick, not to get caught at it.
And how do you do that? By acting well, I know,
but by finding that place in yourself where you can begin to figure out how deep the place is from which your life flows. And then the rest of it is, it's trust. It's trust in a writer. It's trust in ideas.
If you could, in your own mind, and include yourself, think of maybe the top 10 actors today, what would they have that would have made them that? An ability to access themselves might be one possibility. What else?
I think there is something about, there is a remarkable feeling when you realize that you can have an effect on people.
And when did you first...
Whether it's through comedy or through drama or even through, helping others or education. There is, I can imagine how fulfilling it is for teachers who love what they do.
And they can see it in a kid's eyes.
And they can see it in a kid's eyes, and you can see the effect that you have on a child in terms of giving them confidence in themselves, learning how to collaborate with others. All of these things that I was a beneficiary of when I grew up in the state of California, because I grew up at a time when there was an enormous amount of money in schools, in high schools and junior high schools, in the arts. And all that money got taken away. And when it got put back into sports. And none of these programs that I experienced are around anymore. But I mean, I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, going to workshops with professional actors, doing one-act festivals, doing Shakespeare festivals, having these incredible experiences where I was the very first moment that I started to realize that I could do something. And when you're a kid and you start to realize you can actually accomplish something, that's the first step on the ladder of success. And it doesn't matter whether you want to be in the arts or not.
That you can do something that people will notice, that will react to, or somebody will say that's good.
Yeah, somebody will say that was good. And you just think, wow, really?
Yeah. And it makes you want to do it again.
It makes you want to do it again.
It makes you want to get better at it.
Yes. And that's why now I'm spending a huge, the next 8 years of my life, the last 3 years of my life, working as hard as I am at the Old Vic in all the things that we do that are about a social enterprise. They're not about producing plays, but about giving opportunities to so many other people.
Tell me what the Old Vic means to theater in Britain, and B, how you came to get there.
Well, the Old Vic, for those of you who may not know, was built in 1818. At the time, it was the only building on the South Bank of London other than a mental hospital.
And sometimes people confuse the two.
Yes, indeed. It is the home of where the National Symphony began, the National Opera began, the National Ballet began, the National Theater began, as well as Morley College, which used to have their classes in the backstage area. It has been the home of probably the greatest actors that have ever graced a stage, from Sir John Gielgud, who ran the theater for many, many years, made his debut there in 1924. Laurence Olivier, of course, ran it for many years. It's where the National Theater was housed for 14 seasons before they moved to their own building on the South Bank. Peter O'Toole ran it, Ralph Richardson, Tyrone Guthrie. Judi Dench made her debut there.
Yeah. But these are all people who are great theater actors and great Shakespearean actors, but who've also had wonderful success in film.
Oh, yeah.
Who've been able to balance it.
Yeah.
You don't see that as much in America as you do, or as you did in London.
That's because I think less and less people who go into the arts, go into film and television, study their craft. They don't go to school. And therefore you don't have the kind of diversity and training that you see when you see the kind of actors that we're talking about work on a stage.
So how did the Old Vic come to get you?
The Old Vic happened,
or vice versa?
well, it happened because I was in London 8 years ago doing a production of The Iceman Cometh at the Almeida Theatre, which is a small 298-seat theatre up in Islington. And we then decided to move the production, and we ultimately moved it to the Old Vic Theatre and played another 16 weeks in London. And I fell absolutely madly in love with that theatre, with the actual space, because to perform in that theatre is quite unique. It's a theater that is designed with a horseshoe-shaped balcony, so there's no balcony jutting up over the orchestra. And acoustically, it is the best theater I've ever played in. I've never lost my voice at the Old Vic. I've lost my voice in every other theater I've ever played in, including the Almeida, which was a small house, but a difficult house to play. It was a theater born, made for actors. So actors love it, and I loved it being there. And then Sally Green, who was the chairman of the Old Vic, asked if I would go on the committee to help find the artistic director of the Old Vic. They wanted to start a producing theater company.
This sounds like a Dick Cheney story.
It is a Dick Cheney story. Because I went on this committee, and we were sort of having meetings and coming up with lists, and then one night it just hit me.
That I'm the person you're looking for.
Well, I'm not saying I'm the person. It just hit me that this was what I wanted to do my whole life, was run a theater. And as close to Dick Cheney as I'll ever get, I put my name on the list of candidates, and now here I am.
So you actually put your name on the list. Now here's my impression of you, I don't want to come back to the Old Vic, is that the ambition, as they said about Lincoln, burns inside of you. It has in the past. And that for whatever reason that you set out to work as hard as you could, you analyzed and studied what it meant to be a great actor, to be a good actor, and you understood what stops you had to make in order to get there. That you were as good a student of what it meant to succeed in every dimension in the theater, right? That's you.
Yes, of course, Charlie. You've got me down to a T.
Well, no, tell me. It's not true? You were driven?
Yes, I was driven, and I was ambitious, and there is no doubt that I had as much of a plan as you can have when you don't know what the hell you're going to do.
So are you still that way, or have you reached a point in midlife that you're different?
I am. I think I've reached a point in my life where I am no longer concerned with my own personal career.
Yeah. You wanted to be a star.
Sure.
You wanted to be a great actor.
Sure.
So you're at the Old Vic, being what?
The artistic director. Meaning, we decide what plays we put on. I'm in some of the plays. I'm trying to build a company there that is going to last long after I'm gone, which is why I felt a 10-year commitment was the right thing to do. And I also, you know, after 10 years of making movies, you know, not exclusively, but I did 2 plays in between that 10-year period. And I got to the end of '99, and American Beauty had come out, and you know, it was responded to with such genuine affection. And it brought me such personal gratification. And I just thought, well, now what am I supposed to do? Am I going to spend another 10 years making movie after movie after movie after movie and occasionally try to squeeze a play in? And I thought, no. I think I'd rather do play after play after play after play and occasionally squeeze a movie in. And that's what I'm doing now for the next 8 years.
And the plays that you want to produce are across the board? I mean, you're going to do, I don't know if you're going to do Chekhov, but you're certainly doing O'Neill, you're certainly doing Shakespeare.
Yeah. Just give you an example of the stuff that we have coming up. We're opening September 15th with Moon for the Misbegotten, which is Eugene O'Neill's great play that Howard Davies, who directed Iceman Cometh, will direct again with the same design team. I'll play that till the end of December. Then we have 2 Shakespeares coming in that Ed Hall, Peter Hall's son, is going to direct, Twelfth Night and Taming of the Shrew. Then we're going to do the 50th anniversary of John Osborne's remarkable The Entertainer,
right.
Which hasn't been done in London in quite some time. And
Olivier did that?
Olivier did it, both on stage and as a film.
Right.
And Robert Lindsay, the great British star, is going to star in it. Then we're going to do The Norman Conquests, which are Alan Ayckbourn's extraordinary trilogy of plays that were a huge success in London 33 years ago, but he's never given the rights to a theater company since. So we're going to have the first revival of Norman Conquest. I've got Stephen Fry to write our next panto. Does anyone know what the panto is in England?
I don't either.
We had the panto over the last 2 years, a very, very big, successful Christmas production for us. The panto is always based on a classic children's tale. So we did Aladdin, and so you follow the classic tale of Aladdin. But what makes it unique and different is that it is a very, very naughty production because it's done in a way where you have contemporary references and all kinds of innuendos, many of them sexual. And they go right over the tops of the kids' heads. I mean, kids come, they're 3, they're 4, they're 5, they're 7, they're 8. The kids are following the Aladdin story, having a great time. And there's all these remarkably naughty things being said. And so the adults are having a great time as well. And what makes it unique in Britain is that in the panto tradition, the man always plays the woman. So for the past 2 years, Ian McKellen has played the widow Twankey in our production of Aladdin. And we are about to do, in the Christmas of 2007, we're not doing one this Christmas, but of 2007, we're going to do Cinderella. Stephen Fry is writing the script, and what's fun about that is that there's 2 ugly sisters. So there'll be 2 men dressed in drag. And it's actually the most surprising thing about it, because I didn't know about it. When I came to Ian McKellen and I said, I want you to come back to the Old Vic, he had not been on the Old Vic stage since 1964 under Olivier's reign when he did Much Ado About Nothing.
So why did he want to do it?
He wanted to do a panto because he grew up with it. He loved the panto. And he had to educate me about what the panto was, because we don't have the tradition in America at all. It is the single largest money-making adventure in theater in England. It tours, and it is a traditional thing that's been going on forever. The last time Aladdin was done at the Old Vic, in fact, to give you a sense of this tradition, was 1860.
And has it been popular in America at all?
I don't think they've ever done it in America. The closest they've gotten was the Carol Burnett show.
Well, doesn't that give you an idea? Maybe I should bring that over here.
The panto?
Yeah.
I'm not interested in playing the panto, but I enjoy watching it. It's absolutely hilarious. And also, we brought it back to London. It had not been done in London for about 20 years.
Now, how much of an incumbency do you feel to perform as artistic director? Because you are an attraction for developing an audience, and the Old Vic for its survival.
Well, it was important in the first, year and a half for me to take a much more central role and to be performing in plays much more often than I will be in the future. Because, you know, it's hard to break through. You know, I got 33 years of this slightly checkered history of this theater being really a receiving house. Although it had had a number of artistic companies that had come and visited there, it was basically a receiving house. So you're fighting against 33 years of that, and I knew that we had to break through in order to start to build that audience. But now as we're going on, you know, we're 18 months old, we've done 8 plays, and over 425,000 people have purchased tickets for our productions. So we look at that as a very encouraging sign.
Now, can you make it just on ticket sales, or you have to go in?
No, we have corporate sponsorship, and we have individual sponsors and benefactors,
and the rest.
And, you know, eventually I wouldn't mind a little money from the government, because we don't have any subsidy whatsoever.
Does the government subsidize many theaters in London?
The National Theatre gets, I think, £60 million a year.
Wow. Pretty
sure. And we don't get any.
Do you think it's a serious indictment of America we don't have a national theater?
Yes. Yeah. Question is, where would it be? I mean, they tried to do one in Washington, D.C. I was part of that. Peter Sellers attempting to start the American National Theater at the Kennedy Center. I know Tony Randall had a vision here in New York, and he was quite successful, and he certainly should be applauded for having cared and loved so much the theater and having started that company. But I do think it is shocking that in the United States, where we have so much cultural diversity, we have so many talented people, that there hasn't ever been an effort put forward, quite frankly, by any administration, to create a national theater in this country.
There is this interesting relationship between, and mindset in America between government and support of the arts. You know, that's unlike lots of other places. Either because of priorities or because of lots of other things. You know, there is this resistance to...
Well, and also, I mean, you have places like the National Endowment of the Arts, which does do good work, and but its budget is minuscule, and so therefore the money that gets chopped up in such small amounts that does it ever really give people the kind of money they need.
And on the other hand, America has the greatest sense of philanthropic generosity than any country in the world. You know, that's individual.
It's true, and I suppose one of the things that I've been finding at the Old Vic in terms of fundraising, you know, there's a lot of things that you raise money for, and the Old Vic is a charitable organization. But it's interesting how much easier it is to get people to understand what you're doing when you're not just talking about producing plays. When you start talking about educating people, using the tools of theater to educate, using outreach programs to become a community theater as well as a world-known theater, using our emerging talent programs through our Old Vic New Voices, where we're working on developing young writers, young actors, young playwrights, young producers, that's stuff people can grapple onto because that makes sense to them. And that they're willing to give money to. It's more difficult to raise money to put on plays.
But do you want young playwrights to come into the Old Vic?
We have been, over the last number of years since we've been there, developing new work. We've announced some new work that we're doing, and we absolutely are doing a lot of it. We had it's a long story, but we had a contest recently with some. We created a young company. Essentially, we did this thing. They do it in New York, and I luckily came here and asked the company that does this to come over to London and help us start it, so that we could, in a sense, own the idea and do it at the Old Vic. There's a thing in New York called the 24-hour companies. They do the 24-hour plays. Do you know what this is?
No.
24 actors, 6 playwrights, 6 directors, 6 producers come together on a Saturday night. Actors stand up. They've been asked to bring a prop. They bring a prop. This is my water glass. This is my blow-up sex doll. This is my, whatever it is, whatever prop. And then we take Polaroids of all the actors, and each of them are asked to tell us one thing they do really well that maybe no one knows they do. And all the playwrights are writing this information down because they might write it into a play. Then the actors are released. Then the writers will say, I want to write a play, because you do it with celebrities as a fundraiser. I want to write a play for Judi Dench. I want to write a play for this actor. So we then sequester the writers into a hotel at midnight. And between midnight and 6:30 in the morning, they each have to write a 10-minute play that did not exist the night before. The next morning, we get the plays, we assign the directors, we cast, they all go off and rehearse all day long, and at 7:30 that night, after we show a little 3-minute movie of the previous 23 hours, as we film the whole event, we present in front of a sold-out audience 6 plays, 10 minutes long, that did not exist the night before. And it's the maddest, most creatively insane.
Yeah.
I tell all the company when we start, I say, ladies and gentlemen, at one point in the next 24 hours, one of you or all of you are going to be on the phone to your agent saying, get me the hell out of this. But I promise that's a temporary feeling. Well, we had a big success with it for 2 years, and I said, I want to do it for kids. I want to give this opportunity to kids between 18 and 25, that critical period where you're either still in school or figuring out what you want to do with your life. Give kids an opportunity. So we got Starbucks to sponsor this whole event for us. And in every Starbucks store in London were applications.
Yeah.
And we had over 5,000 applications. We saw about 200 kids, and we picked 25, 50, the bulk of them being actors. And they had this experience. And it was a fantastic series of workshops that led up to the actual event. The event itself was a wonderful thing for them. But what's been great is that each of them have talked about how that night was an incredible, wonderful experience to perform on the old big stage, but that wasn't the best part. The best part's been what's followed, how they've all networked together, and now they're off writing plays, and they're doing plays here and doing plays there. And we held a contest with a number of them for a new play, and one of them won, and it was just an extraordinarily beautiful play, and it's now been picked up to go to the Edinburgh Festival this summer. So we are absolutely determined to not just develop in workshop, but to actually get to performance young writers.
What's the best play you saw in the last 12 months?
I'm trying to think when I had time to go see a play. That's the really
History
sad
Boys.
part.
Did you see History
I
Boys?
saw History Boys, of course. I'm actually looking forward to going back to London to see the new Tom Stoppard play.
That's what I was going to say. That was exactly what I was
at the Royal
going to
Court that Trevor Nunn directed.
Now, that will be where? What theater?
That's at the moment it's at the Royal Court, but it's moving to the West End.
Okay, so it'll be the equivalent of Broadway.
Yeah. I would say The Royal Hunt of the Sun was a very, very beautifully done production of the National that Trevor directed. First time it's been revived in a very, very long time.
How is British theater different from Broadway? Because there are links, things come from Britain to the United States, and didn't you take Iceman to London after it was successful here? Or
no, the other way around.
London.
Yeah, we started in London and brought it here.
But some plays do go the other way.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
hard
Angels in America, I think, may
Sure,
have
it's hard to say. You know, there's sometimes plays that work beautifully here in America or in New York come to London and don't work. Plays that are there come here and don't work. It's harder for me to sort of pinpoint what the big differences are, simply because I have experienced such remarkable audiences.
But if somebody says he's a British actor or a Broadway actor, in both cases not referring to geography, but there's something about them, what do they mean?
I don't know, they might be talking about musical actors more than they are.
In Broadway?
Yeah. He's a Broadway baby, you know, that kind of thing.
What is your favorite impression?
My favorite impression?
Yeah. Johnny Carson.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed doing Bill Clinton because he's so fun to do.
Can you do Bill Clinton?
Well, why don't you ask me a question as if I were Bill Clinton? I mean, if we're going to play it,
let's
Charlie.
play it. Well, I need... You're not supposed to laugh at that. All right, so I'll be interviewing Bill Clinton.
All right, you go right ahead.
Mr. President, can you imagine being the first spouse in the White House? If your wife, Mr. President.
Charlie, not only can I imagine it, but I dream about it every night.
Why do you think your wife?
Oh, we're going on. You like this, dude?
Yes, I do. I can play this game.
Yeah, okay.
Why do you think your wife would make a good president? You know what it means to be president. You were there for 8 years. What does she have?
Well, she has what she's always had. She's smarter than me. All my best ideas came from Hillary.
Yeah. You know the American actor Kevin Spacey.
Oh, he does a good impression of me. It's good.
We're going to play this a little bit more because it's so good. So you're Johnny Carson.
I loved Johnny Carson. In fact,
I did too.
I recently, I had a chance to do Johnny Carson. I did him once. It was just before he left the air, and I got to be a guest on the Carson show.
And you did it then?
I did it. I had done a television movie. Some of you may remember this with horror. I did a television movie about Jim and Tammy Baker.
Oh, yes.
And I played Jim Baker, and Tammy Faye was Bernadette Peters.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, it was a TV movie. But it was a job. And Carson had had such a field day with the Bakers in his monologues that he asked me to come onto the show. And I was so excited because he was going to let me do my impression of him.
The first appearance on the Carson show?
First appearance on the Carson show. In fact, I think my first sort of national talk show. And I was so excited because I had studied Johnny Carson for years and years. I used to go to The Tonight Show and watch him live.
This is exactly what I was referring to earlier.
To learn about how to do Johnny Carson.
I rest my case.
And so I was so excited because apparently Carson was he was uncomfortable with people who did impressions of him. He always thought it was high comedy that wasn't really accurate. But he'd seen a tape that I'd done and he was going to let me do it. But it turned out that there was another guest on the show, an elderly woman who wrote a column for a small town newspaper called the Frogtown News. You know how Johnny used to have just regular citizens on. And she talked forever. And then Robert Klein was the second guest, and he went on for a very long time. So by the time I got on the show, I had about 1 minute and 20 seconds with a clip. And Carson leaned over to me in the commercial break, because we were going to come back and say goodnight. He leaned over and he said, "Listen, I'm really sorry we didn't get to the bit. I wanted to do that bit to have you do me, but I couldn't get the old woman to shut up." And Robert Klein decides to be funny for the first time in 6 years. Who knew? And I recently found that tape. I had not seen that since I'd done it. I recently found that tape, and it just stunned me that, I really miss him. I would love to see a current Johnny Carson monologue. Boy, could he have some fun.
I know.
Oh, man.
It's not even close. There's no one even the same.
I think Letterman is close. I think Letterman
actually,
is
what
close.
I was going to say, I think Letterman is in an interesting way, although I think what his skill is different from what Carson's was. But I think Letterman would be the first to say, those guys, and especially David, David had a relationship with him, worshiped Johnny Carson.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
he'd be the first to say, no one can do it like he did.
No one can do it.
And no one could do any of it. There was no one who, in a sense, could make someone into a love, could get the best out of him. His whole devotion was, I want to make you look good.
He got the best out of everybody. And what was so fascinating about going and watching him live was to suddenly realize things that he did that you could never quite see on camera. I'll give you an example. Johnny, as you know, folks, should I stand in the light? Johnny, as you know, he had a very erect posture. This is true. He was a bit up like that. And I never quite understood it, but he was actually standing on his toes, which you can't see below the camera. And there's a reason for this. Number one, he could swivel. He could talk to Ed, he could talk to Doc, and if a joke didn't work, he had somewhere to go.
Very good. Was he hard to do? To get it?
The way it actually happened was I was in a play in which I was playing a character from the Midwest, and someone came backstage after the show, and I was about 15, and said, "You sounded exactly like Johnny Carson," because I was talking like, somehow that Dick Cavett, Carson, back of the throat, Midwestern style. And I guess I'd chosen to do that. And then I started watching Johnny, and I realized, oh wow, I actually did kind of sound like him. So it actually, once I started to perfect it and work on it, and then I did stand-up comedy for a while, and Carson was one of the big impressions I did. But I used to do things like I played talent contests in bowling alleys at midnight. Yeah. People who are in bowling alleys at midnight don't watch Johnny Carson. That was what I learned.
Who's your second favorite?
Well, Lemon. I always loved Lemon. And the funny thing about Lemon is, this is the big difference between Jack Lemmon and Johnny Carson is that Johnny's up here and Jack's down here. I love Jack. I love the way Jack just had a way around words, and he had such a, you know, Jack could talk faster than anybody I ever knew. How you doing? You want to take a sneaky peek, Stiffy? He used to say that to the girls. I can't say it.
He always had a piano on set.
He always had a piano on set. He loved to play piano, and he played very well. Very, very well. So whenever you were on a film set with Jack, he'd be off somewhere on a piano.
Now, how many performances did you do with him? Was it on stage or was
We
it
did.
film?
We did Long Day's Journey into Night for about a year, both on Broadway in London and Washington D.C.
So that's when you
Tel
got to know
Aviv.
him.
Yeah, that was when I got to know him really well. And then we did 3 things on film. We did a television series called The Murder of Mary Fagan, a motion picture called Dad, and then Glengarry Glen Ross, which he liked to call Gene Barry Glenn Close, because it was easier to say.
And what was the relationship? I mean, did you two call each other great friends?
Yeah. And for me, after my father died, Jack really kind of took on the role of father for me. And I always used to call him with questions and ideas and should I do this part? And you know, he was always there for me and always had great advice and always was the most gracious example that Hollywood glory does not have to go to your head. And he was a great example for me to grow up with.
When you think about the people that have shaped you in terms of what you have become, Lemon, Brando simply because Brando's there. I mean, Brando, every actor I know sort of worships at his... And only half of his life was about doing great things.
Well, I wonder if Brando were around, he would disagree with you. I think that he probably felt that the rest of his life was more important than
that. He sure was.
Part.
No. But I mean the same thing. And he would disagree with me. And,
yeah.
And he would say, you know, it's my talent, and I'll do what I want to with it.
You know, him and also, you know, a person had huge influence on me, and who I think of constantly in the role that I am now at the Old Vic was Joseph Papp.
Oh, great. Yeah, Shakespeare in the Park.
Shakespeare in the Park. My very first job was Shakespeare in the Park.
Playing?
A spear carrier.
Oh, I'm sure, yes. You did.
It was a great experience, and also because Joe took an interest in emerging talent. And he always used to come around to the rehearsals, and he'd sit around and he'd watch, and then he'd saddle up to you, and he'd say, "Hey, where are you from? And, you know, how long have you been in theater? Did you go to school? Good." And after I did Shakespeare in the Park, I couldn't get a job. I didn't have an agent, I didn't have any money, and I was very, very frustrated, and I decided to go back to the Public Theater and see if I could see Mr. Papp. And I asked if I could see him, and he remembered me from the park, so called me into his office, and I sat down, and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Papp, you know, I had the job in the park, and it was great, and I don't have an agent, I can't get a job, and I really just really don't want to wait on tables. And I thought maybe if there was a job, you know, here at the festival, and I could do anything." So Jeff said, yeah. So he left the office, and he came back, and he hired me in the stock room. And in the basement of the Public Theater, I handed out pads and pencils and erasers and, you know, whatever people needed for productions to directors and stage managers. And then I worked my way up into several offices at the Public Theater. And then I worked myself into Mr. Papp's office while he was, some of you may remember this, when he was trying desperately to save the demolition of the Morosco and Helen Hayes theaters on 45th Street, which eventually were demolished for the Marquess Hotel. But he had this campaign going, and I became a part of that. And while that was happening, I got an off-Broadway show. And it was actually in a dance space on 13th Street. And it was a Friedrich Schiller play, and I got my first New York review in the Village Voice. And someone at the festival showed Mr. Papp this review. And the next night, he came to the theater, and he saw this little play I was in. And the next day, he called me into his office. And he fired me.
As a stock boy?
He just fired me. And I said, "Well, what did I do?" He said, No, you didn't do anything. But you've been working here now 9 months. You've become very comfortable with the 100 and whatever bucks I was getting paid a week. He said, "And last night I went to the theater and I saw an actor on stage. And that's what you should be doing." And he pushed me out. He paid a month's salary. And 4 months later, he and his wife Gail were in the opening night audience of my first Broadway play.
Wonderful. Is there anything that you have been obsessed, dying to do, either a performance or something else in terms of your profession?
Well, I was very disappointed you didn't call me to host your show when you were out.
I was sedated in a hospital room.
When weren't you sedated?
I was thinking, am I going to make it through this day, rather than, have I missed Kevin Spacey? Would he be good at this?
All right, have it your way.
All right. But I mean, is there some Shakespearean character? Is there something about O'Neill that you haven't done? Is there?
There's a lot. I mean, the answer to the question is there's a lot. And certainly in the theater, it's harder to say what I might or might not want to do in film, because very often you just don't know what films will come your way until they do. But in theater, there is absolutely so many Shakespearean plays I'd like to tackle. In fact, that's the discussion that I'm having now with Trevor Nunn about what are we going to do next. We've announced we're doing another play together. We don't know what next.
Is there anybody who you can look at as a role model? I mean, and say, in film alone, there are people like Clint Eastwood, who's been able to combine commercial vehicles and things that he wanted to do. Clooney's doing a bit of that now, from Ocean's 12 to Good Night and Good Luck. But in terms of stage and film, who's doing that? Who has stage as still a central part of their life, and at the same time?
Well, without question, Ian McKellen. I mean, hands down.
Ian, he's exactly right.
You know,
right.
He and Judi Dench, who's now on stage in London doing Hay Fever and does lots of films and beautifully.
And will be in whatever James Bond movie there is.
Absolutely. I think that there are a handful of them. Yeah. There are certainly a lot of actors in England who do both television and theater and film all the time.
Interesting, the two you mentioned are two of our greatest Shakespearean actors.
Yes. Yes. You know, I don't think it's by accident. You know, they trained, they studied, they worked for 20 years before they ever did a movie, maybe more.
Please join me in thanking the great Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey at the 92nd Street Y. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.